runs at DHS in terms of coordinating interagency with critical infrastructure and other industry on response to specific cyber threats. So we have a very solid foundation in terms of relationship and understanding. The issue really is what specific types of capability and what thresholds of capacity other agencies would need in different types of circumstances. And then we need to assess that against what our warfighting requirements are and how do we do that balance.
Admiral Rogers.
So in addition to the individuals integrated from DHS, FBI, and other partners within my ops structure and my integration in their ops structure, if you will, series of specific exercises. We do 2 major exercises with our DHS and interagency teammates twice a year. I'm sorry, it's 2 exercises that occur 2 times total for the year. In addition, a series of tabletop exercises. You look at some of the things we have planned in the next 90 days, for example, we're going to be doing some election interaction at a tabletop kind of level with our DHS partners. The area that I am leaving, as you're aware, the area that I've talked to the team about, I really want us to get into next is let's get down to the actual center and sector level, because that's where it comes to the day-to-day execution. Guys, if we want to get to speed, we want to get to agility, because as operational commander, those are big to me. I want to get to speed and I want to get to agility to actually execute. Let's look at what we can do to actually perhaps integrate at that level. So that's kind of a future focus for us as I'm moving forward.
And I want to build on that. One of the statements this morning was the lack of a common operating picture impedes our ability to have this comprehensive cyber strategy. What do we do to address this lack of coherent operating picture?
For me, I apologize, Ken. First, it's a common operating picture of what? You want an operating picture of critical infrastructure? You want an operating picture of all of private infrastructure?
Well, that's part of the question is
Right.
What is the role of Cyber Command to drive those conversations? What is that interagency process? I think we need to have the answer to all of those.
So for me, my input would be the mission set that I'm directly responsible for within the broader DoD effort is the critical infrastructure piece. So I'm really interested. So how do we get to an integrated real-time picture that enables us to have an accurate sense of what is going on, that enables decision-making and helps to speed that decision-making? So that would be my recommendation for a kind of first focus, even though, as I acknowledge, that's not going to be DoD's lead here. We're in a supporting role, but I like to think we need to be part of this discussion and we can help.
So how do we spur that, though? I think the status quo is unsustainable. Obviously, we need to spur that interagency integration.
I appreciate that you're familiar with the National Cyber Incident Response Framework, but that really does drive how we organize and operate within the federal government in terms of our engagement with industry and other players. And in the DHS role, in terms of the asset response piece, the FBI has the threat response piece, and then we have DNI, who's got the intelligence integration function.
Okay, I'm going to have to take the rest for the record. Mr. Langevin.
Thank you, Elise, and I want to again thank our witnesses for being here today. Secretary Rapuano, as I mentioned in my opening statement, I believe that the U.S. policy on Title X cyber operations needs to be advanced both domestically and internationally in order to effectively employ the force, deter adversarial actors, respond to adversarial cyber actors, and shape international norms for military use of cyber capabilities. So what actions are the department and the administration taking to advance the understanding of and the gaps in existing laws, authorities, and policies relating to cyber operations to develop standard frameworks and guidance?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. As you all appreciate, the challenge associated with defining traditional military activities in the cyber domain is typically that is done by looking back historically at what are traditional types of military operations. In a domain that is so novel in many respects and for which we do not have the empirical data and experience associated with military operations per se, particularly outside zones of conflict, there are some relatively ambiguous areas associated with, well, what constitutes traditional military activities. This is something that we are looking at within the administration, and we've had a number of discussions with members and your staffs. So that is an area that we're looking at in terms of understanding what the trades are and what the implications are of changing the current definition, if that were deemed to be warranted.
Certainly something the committee is going to continue to provide rigorous oversight on and work with you as we develop. So how do you intend to defend forward, in quotes, as is outlined in the new command vision? Do you envision this defensive posture as using cybercom capabilities and intelligence to provide targeted assistance to national assets, including, for example, critical infrastructure, or would this involve Title X activities being used to disrupt platforms potentially before an operation actually begins?
So defending forward in the DoD context is really looking at the source of the cyber attacks or otherwise malevolent activities. And it's looking at how we can get at it, how we can uproot it, and also how we can hold other equities valued by the adversary perpetrating the act at risk. And with that, I'll just turn it to Admiral.
So the vision you outline is, my goal as a commander is to try to get ahead of problem sets before they occur. Therefore, I am interested in asking myself, within the authorities granted to me and within the broad legal framework that we use for the application of DoD capabilities, how can we attempt to forestall activity before it even happens? Failing that, how can we very quickly stop that activity before it has the time or the ability to generate significant impact, if you will, against our critical infrastructure? And so our strategy is about how do you tie, or vision is, how do you tie together the power of intelligence and the insights that generates with the operational capability that DoD has invested in the cyber command structure, in its mission force teams. And so that is our vision for the future. This capability that we've invested, that we've built, how do we use it in a way that attempts to forestall the opponent's ability to gain advantage in the first place? And failing that, how do we stop that activity before they're able to have significant impact?
I think it's important to be forward-leaning. I like the kind of the shift in focus, and I think the American people, quite frankly, expect that we will be more forward-leaning. Admiral Rogers and Secretary Rapuano, leveraging the lessons that we've learned to date is important to achieving success in the cyber domain, especially since we're learning as we go. We benefit, obviously, from every success and every failure. How are lessons learned from Cybercom's mission and operations being leveraged and instituted? And how is readiness being defined for the CMF? And how is this readiness being measured? How are training and recertification processes co-evolving with the threat and the technology landscape? We'll probably run out of time, but I like that for the record.
Yes, sir. So a lot of that question, very quickly. It doesn't matter if it's something we do offensively, if it's something we do defensively. Every time, part of our mission structure is post-defeat, post-event debrief analysis, lessons learned, and then how do we tie this into what we're doing next? So there's a cumulative impact here, which as a commander, I really like.
You'll have to take the rest for the record.
Okay, got it.
Got to move along. Ms. Cheney.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thanks, Admiral Rogers and Secretary Rapuano. I'm concerned, as is the subcommittee and the entire committee, about the lack of any cyber strategy. We haven't seen anything from the administration, despite the fact that we've made requests for it in the NDAA last year. And I wonder if you could shed some light on why that is, why there is no strategy, number one, and number two, how we can be in a position, in light of the threats we're facing, in light of the action that we're seeing, the active measures by our adversaries, to be engaged in any sort of effort to defend or to act offensively without understanding what the overall mission and goals and objectives are in the absence of a strategy. And I guess I would go to you first, Secretary Rapuano.
Thank you. I think one of the reasons is it's very hard. There are a lot of evolving dynamics at play, and we still have a relatively new administration, and there are competing views as to what the right trade space is associated with a variety of equities and risks. That said, it is at the White House, the National Cyber Strategy, and I understand that it should be forthcoming in the near future. We're looking to then enhance our cyber posture approach, which we'll be providing by August, to sync with that national strategy. DoD is one key member of the whole of government, and we want to make sure that we are very thoughtful in terms of very synthesized integration with the national approach.
And I would only add, I don't think you should feel for 1 minute that that means the DoD, for example, has stood pat and done nothing. We've got a national security strategy and a national defense strategy in which cyber is a component. As the operational commander, I've tried to take that broad strategic vision, and as Representative Langeman has articulated, I've laid out in writing to my team, here's kind of the vision I think that we need to be building to that reflects that broader strategic underpinning, even as I acknowledge we have not yet completed a specific cyber strategy, although that work is, we think, getting close. So I would only, please don't think that we're just standing still waiting for someone to tell us, what we.
No, I appreciate that. I was not under any illusions that you were just standing still, and appreciate very much the work you've done. We want to be helpful, but I think it's also absolutely incumbent upon this administration, in light of this threat, to provide some guidance. And precisely, Secretary Rapuano, as you said, it is hard, but it's hard because we're in a whole new world, and our adversaries, in fact, are moving forward, and the lack of ability for us on our part to say, look, this is what we've got to deal with, this is how we're going to operate, this is what we've got to guard against. And frankly, both in a public and classified setting, being able to say to our adversaries, these are the kinds of things that will result in a response from us, and laying that out so we've got a much more effective deterrent policy in place is something that I think we as a subcommittee have got tremendous oversight obligations in looking at it, and the administration itself. Now we've seen significant turnover at the NSC. I see just news reports now that Nadia Shadlow has resigned. Obviously, Mr. Bossert has moved on. We can't let those add to the amount of time that is going to be dedicated now or taken up in putting this strategy together. So it's something we'll continue to work on in a way so we can ensure that the nation is, in fact, got a strategy in place to deal with one of the most important and dangerous threats we face. And I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll yield my time to Representative Murphy.
Ms. Murphy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Admiral Rogers and Mr. Rapuano, for being here. I'm encouraged that the department is making progress on fielding the persistent cyber training environment, which is, as you know, the training platform that allows cyber forces to train in simulated network environments. I represent Orlando, which is home to Army's Program Executive Office for Simulation Training and Instrumentation, or PEO STRI. PEO STRI was tapped to develop and acquire the PCTE, which will also incorporate the work of the National Cyber Range in Orlando. In your view, what do you think the value of a persistent cyber training environment is for readiness? What kinds of individual and collective training objectives do you think it can support? And then as you look into the future, what sorts of capabilities and infrastructure do you foresee these PCTEs requiring?
So for me, Cyber Command, we're the ones who articulated the operational requirement, because my vision, our vision, if you will, is I want to be able to, wherever our cyber forces are garrisoned or stationed. We started early on in this process, large exercises brought together literally 1,000 individuals, teams from across our force. Those are all good things. But when I said to myself, look at the time it takes to build this network, look at the money it costs to do this, while this should be a component of our training strategy, this does not scale for a day-to-day effort. And we need a day-to-day capability that you can train in garrison, where defensively I can mirror my own networks, I can simulate an opposing force attempting to penetrate the network, and I can use my defensive techniques to train against it. Likewise, I can use this. I want to build this over time so I can bring my allies into this. So it's not just us, it's our broader international partners. Because if it's expensive for us, imagine what it is with some of the work we're doing with nations spread around the world in cyber right now, trying to get them to bring their entire team structure to the United States. This is also good for me because I want to be able to create network structures that from an offensive standpoint, I can model, so how am I going to penetrate this? What actions might the defensive team take? I can use offensive and defensive capability together in head-to-head scenarios where, quite frankly, they're each trying to get the better of the other. Never underestimate the positive impact of competition and a little head-to-head contest to keep teams motivated. So those are all examples of why I think PCT is so important for us, because that goes to the ability to retain readiness and the ability to be ready now, not, well, if you give me 3 months, if you give me 4 months, whatever. We can't work that way.
You just mentioned the idea of integrating allies and partners into training together. What do you think? Where do you think there are some opportunities for enhanced training and security cooperation activities in this space? And then, do you have some examples of allies and partners where this is already happening that are maybe benchmarks or best practices for how we can move forward?
So I haven't. Most of our international partners, quite frankly, are in the same place we are. They see a need, they see a requirement. They don't yet have in place the long-term solution that they would like. There's 3 or 4 off the top of my head where I've actually sat down with them and said, hey, walk me through your system. Can I see what you do? We participate in some foreign exercises as well. It isn't just everybody comes to us. I want to learn from others. We participate in foreign cyber exercises. But I think the ability particularly for our the Five Eyes and a handful of other nations where we are just part of an ongoing coalition in cyber, if you will, focused on both the defensive side and in some cases the offensive side. The ability to put together an integrated training structure where, again, I can have their units in garrison. We can model the exact terrain that we think we're going to be dealing with live. That's going to be so impactful for our ability to actually execute mission.
Yeah. And do you envision that as you run these exercises and identify vulnerabilities, whether it's in platforms that are ours or allies and partners and their networks, that you'll be able to
then I turn them
turn it around and get it to the folks who are building that so that they can address them?
Yep, that's part of the idea here.
Great. And then you stated in your testimony that Cybercom is working to synchronize cyber planning and operations across the entire joint force, and that Cybercom is helping the combatant commands improve command and control by establishing integrated planning elements at each COCOM. Can you provide a little more detail on exactly how Cybercom is standing up? Is it COIPEs?
COIPEs, yes.
At each COCOM?
So there's 9 other COCOMs besides us. We become the 10th one, effective with the new commander being confirmed and assuming the duties. I thought one of the biggest shortfalls we had was I thought we did a great job with the Cyber Mission Force in creating a higher headquarters in the form of Cyber Command. But if you truly want to integrate cyber into the breadth of operations across this department, then you've got to integrate this capability at all the COCOMs. And so we said—
Rogers will have to take the rest for the record. It was a good question. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Admiral, you mentioned authorities a little earlier. What would Cybercom require to move from a defensive support posture to an active deterrence posture where you were actually hunting and denying malicious operators before they inflicted damage?
So for right now, if you look at day-to-day authority that's currently granted to the commander of Cyber Command, on the defensive side, I feel very good that I have the authorities that I need to defend the DOD networks. One of the questions I think we need to ask ourselves is, for example, with the defense industrial base, or if DOD's role is going to be to partner in defending critical infrastructure, what level of ability to operate outside the DOD would be appropriate for the Cyber Mission Force? I think that's a good conversation for us to have, because right now, again, not a criticism, an observation. Right now, the current construct, I don't operate outside the DOD. So I would suggest we ought to take a look at that. On the offensive side, I feel very comfortable about the authorities that we have currently put in place to apply cyber in areas of designated hostility, the Syrias, the Iraqs, the Afghanistan of the world. And we are doing operations there almost every day. The area where I think we still need to get to a little more speed and agility, and as Ms. Rapuano has indicated, it's an area that's currently under review right now. We're working our way through is what is the level of comfort in applying those capabilities outside of designated areas of hostility, and how could we potentially speed that up? I don't believe that anybody should grant Cyber Command or Admiral Rogers a blank ticket to do whatever they want. That is not appropriate. The part I'm trying to figure out is what is an appropriate balance to ensure that the broader set of stakeholders here have a voice in what we do, but at the same time, we empower our capabilities with speed and agility to actually have meaningful impact. And I think that's what we're trying to work our way through right now.
And so that brings me to the next question, which deals with the Guard, and as they establish cyber units. I know you said you had 300 full and part-time working with you right now at U.S. Cybercom. These units, I mean, they'll not only be supportive of their home states, but I assume that we would want them to have the authority to be supportive of other states as well.
A lot of it depends on, first of all, I am the son of a guardsman. So I grew up, my father was in the Illinois Guard for 27 years. So as a kid, so I feel very strongly about the value of the Guard. I have lived this personally, and I saw the difference my father made when he served. The challenge, I think, is how do we view this as an integrated whole? So one of the points I make to the Guard and I make to the governors when they ask me this question. Remember, we're all competing for the same manpower pool, if you will. There's only so many people out there with the requisite skills and kind of background. So be leery of doing solution sets where we try to replicate, for example, 50 different independent capabilities across every single state. It's how do we synchronize this? The other point I try to make is remember, cyber doesn't recognize geography. So I'm a resident of the state of Illinois. And if you're trying to protect infrastructure in Illinois, the challenge might be that much of that infrastructure physically doesn't even reside in Illinois. It's the way that the digital backbone has been built. So Title 32 and the Guard's employment outside of Title 10 is all based on legal authority that also has a key geography component. You're acting in a Title 32 capacity within your state. What do we do when the cyber infrastructure that you're trying to defend or impact doesn't reside in that physical location? So my only argument is we need to work our way through this, and we need to think more broadly and in a more integrated approach. So I don't think it's only Guard and Reserve. Likewise, I don't think it's only active. We've got to get across the spectrum, and we got to ask ourselves, whatever we create, how do we do it in a way that maximizes its ability to be employed in potentially multiple different scenarios, not just a scenario, if that makes sense?
Absolutely, it's complex, and the city of Atlanta, as you know, was subject to a ransomware attack, and I can see that. I mean, I think the SamSam ransomware has been around for 8 years now. I mean, I can see this as we talk about infrastructure. It's not just going to be attacks on DoD and on U.S. government operations. It's going to be attacking state operations and city operations. And I quite honestly don't care where the person comes from that stops the attack, nor do I think any other government official would. And just we'll need help with how we draft that language for you. And with that, I yield the remainder of my time.
Ms. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to use the rest of my time to let you finish that question because you were talking about, that it needs to be integrated into the COCOMs.
Right.
But as you finish that, also, if you can talk to me a little bit about how J5 will integrate with these co-IPEs and whether or not they have you have both the manpower and the capacity to and a solid handle on the cybercom plans in order to make sure that they're synchronized.
Right. So one component was we've got to get knowledge and experience at the COCOM level on how you plan and execute cyber operations. Mm-hmm. Secondly, that capability has to be able to be integrated, not just within that particular COCOM, Honolulu, Stuttgart, Tampa, fill in the blank, but it's also got to tie back to Cyber Command so that we've got one integrated approach to how we're doing business here, particularly since the majority, all of the offensive capability within the department, for example, remains under my Cyber Command's operational control. We apply it in support of the other combatant commanders. So we've got to tie this together. We are starting the build in 18. It's going to be finished by 23, so it's a 5-year build out. We'll have IOC at all 9 projected by the end of 19, so by the end of the next fiscal year. That gets an initial operating capability to all of the other 9 combatant commanders, and then we'll flesh it out over the course of the next 3 years. A couple of COCOMs are a little further than others, and we're using this kind of a test case then. I'd highlight, and no disrespect to any, but I'd highlight PACOM and CENTCOM, probably the 2 where at the moment we've started to get the initial investments, and because of some of the broader activity in their theaters that are of high interest, that are bringing our cyber capability to bear, along with a lot of other capabilities, we've kind of decided to use them as a bit of a test case, if you will.
Great. And I guess, are you going to be also providing the training and resources to help people have the cyber fluency to be able to
Right, so-
engage, even if that's not their primary
Right, so
mission?
part of this is we'll help develop this training standards for every one of the billets. This is also a good example of how once, with each service having created a core cyber competency, one of my visions is, so you could do one tour at a combatant commander, you could do another tour in one of our mission teams, you could do another tour at Cyber Command, you could do another tour in ASD, in cyber policy, you could go to the joint staff and do cyber work. One of the values of this professionalization that as a department we've put in place now is that we'll get recurring benefit by moving people, so we don't have to train so it's the first time you've ever done this. We don't want to go through that every time. There's always a first time, but I don't want to have to do that every time if I can avoid it.
Great, thank you very much. I'll yield back.
Mr. Garamendi. That concludes the open portion of this session. We are now going to move to 2337. I also want to just let the members know we're going to have a quarterly cyber briefing. So if there are questions you have we didn't get to today, that will be scheduled in the coming week. So with that, this is gavelled out, and we'll hustle upstairs.